Hello, welcome to Philosophy Roulette 112. It looks like I'm broadcasting again, so that's good. Where we read philosophy papers we find online and review them live. So, okay, you know what? This is slightly too loud at the moment. I know it's not as loud for you guys, but it is in the background for me too. Keep out the background noise. So, let's see what we're gonna do today. Let's check the journal article, see if anything updated, because it's all the same stuff last 2 days. Analysis. This has been like, yeah, see, I'm starting to learn how the new journal page gets updated. Let's see if analysis has anything. But, I mean, these are not new articles. They've been here for a while. I mean, I read this one. I don't know if I read this one. I don't think it's available, so there's only 7 downloads. This was a review. I have read this one here. This is a review. Read this one, I think. Let's see. Time biases. Did I read that one? Because we were reading other stuff on time. That was kind of fun. We read this one. We read this one. Yeah. Time biases. Let's see. What do we got? Oh, that's right. This one has a, the author's name is common and same as the, paper title, so it just doesn't show up. Okay, but it's still not here. That's too bad. Forthcoming. I just like analysis because it's short. I'm pretty sure I've read all of these. Okay, but maybe the one at the bottom is new. I think that's how it works. An argument for entity grounding. Another grounding paper. Alright, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go to the journal list again. Because, I was looking at, I had a paper rejected this morning. Awesome. Test rejected, so that's not so bad. Didn't waste much of my time. But I was like, maybe I'll send it to a journal I haven't looked at yet. So, I was thinking, what haven't I sent that stuff to? I was like, Pacific Philosophical Quarterly. I don't think I've ever sent an article to, which is unfortunate. And I was thinking, plenty of journals on this popular list have not been I've never reviewed a paper from them. So let's see what they've got coming. No page numbers here. All right, so let's go back to here. Alright, now there's the skeptical challenge. Alrighty, that's cool. Oh, that's the only one that's short enough. Okay, so hopefully it's available. What are we looking for? This is Knowledge and Truth, a Skeptical Challenge. Yeah, again, getting the common name bug here. Oh, yeah. Not available. Once in a while this works. It did not, though. Or did it? It did! It was open access! How do you like that? Shucks. Yeah, so this is what I would... Well, let's actually see if it works. Does only one page show up? Come on. You have to... View on website. Download. Oh, so were they, Well, let's find out. This is a very complicated download button. I think it was the 3rd time I had to push it. Okay. Okay, let's see. I'm a little skeptical that actually worked. This has embedded files? Yeah, here, look at this. See, there's embedded files. What did they do? Huh. Look at that. Interesting. So maybe they're... I mean, I've heard... I don't know, but I'm pretty sure it's true. PDFs actually are like little operating systems inside themselves. Like, you can build in like all sorts of evil... analytics and stuff into them because it's a controlled format in some sense. The Adobe Corporation has made it so that you can do lots of sophisticated things there, for good and for evil. And so yeah. So this is one of those things, like PDFs are not like innocent files. You open them and then who knows? Okay, it doesn't really matter. So what do we've got? Knowledge and Truth: A Skeptical Challenge by Wesley Buckwalter and John Turri. From the Pacific Philosophical Quarterly, which is a journal I have never dealt with before, I don't think. Which seems like an oversight on my part. I apologize, Pacific Philosophical Quarterly. If you are to join me live, you can get a link back to this page with by typing !paper in the chat box, or it's in the show notes below the video if you're watching this later, not live. Okay, cool. This is not too bad. Alrighty, so introduction. The human organism is, from the point of view of physics, a certain kind of measuring apparatus. As such, it has certain inherent limitations. And they're quoting Bos von Frossen. Alright, human as a measuring apparatus. You know, I don't know what the point of view of physics is, to tell you the truth. It's like saying God's eye view. I don't really know what that is. But it's an interesting quote, Bos von Frossen. Human beings are limited creatures. You saying I'm not 6 foot tall? Alright. Human beings are limited creatures. Despite our best efforts, there are many things we will never fully observe, represent, calculate, or measure. For example, scientists will probably never directly observe a corpse or measure the precise size or age of the universe. In these and other matters, often the best they can do is rely on approximation. For example, scientists at National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, use 15 decimal places as an approximate value of pi, even though it is, strictly speaking, not the actual value of pi. Yeah. But I mean, they're not attempting to measure pi, but I guess they use that for other stuff at NASA. They also estimate the age of the universe, such as approximately 13.8 billion years, give or take a few million years. Such limitations have long been discussed by philosophers of science, who acknowledge that the measurement is nothing more or less than a controlled or regulated estimation, and that science does not aim at establishing immutable truths and eternal dogmas. Its aim is to approach the truth by successive approximations without claiming that at any stage final and complete accuracy has been achieved. Approximation is also ubiquitous in everyday life, although it is considerably less accurate outside of NASA. Actually, I should hold up here for a sec. Science does not aim at some immutable truth. Its aim is to approach the truth by successive approximations without claiming that at any stage final complete accuracy has been achieved. This complete accuracy right here, this is what's getting me. It's the completeness. It may be, I think this is a little question begging, because the accuracy that they aim for, yeah, it's not like complete accuracy, but it's like that they can be completely accurate within their own sort of bounds. So I think the notion of complete accuracy, like we're gonna know that we're gonna start using pi to like in some sort of infinite decimal, is like missing the point of what the accuracy actually means here. I think there's a little bit of a semantic mistake in the saying complete accuracy. Okay, I just want to note that right there. Okay. Approximation is also ubiquitous in everyday life, although it is considerably less accurate outside of NASA. When representing, observing, and measuring things, we frequently approximate distances, spatial orientations, trajectories, speed, size, colors, temperatures, dates, and times. For example, the representation that a mile equals 1.6 kilometers, that my mailbox is 2 feet from the street, and that 16 ounces of water was added to the recipe, that 2 blue shirts are the same shade, that the current temperature is 75 degrees Fahrenheit outside, or that the current time is 9:03, is that AM or PM? Are all, because this looks like a someone in the United States, because why else would you use Fahrenheit? And 2 feet from the street. I mean, who else is using imperial? I mean, I guess there are a few people, but These representations closely approximate the truth, but they are not strictly true. For example, my mailbox is actually not 2 feet from the street. It is 1.9 feet. Well, I'm sure it's not exactly 1.95 feet. So it's like none of these things are true. What do you mean by true in this case? I did not add 16 ounces of water to the mixture. I added 15.90 ounces of water, and it is not 903. It is 902.58. So what's your point, author? And while the use of everyday measurement tools such as clocks, rulers, or kitchen scales may sometimes allow more litigious, punctual, or Epicurean among us to make very accurate representations of these things, in practice measurement error all but guarantees that such representations will always be only approximate. Given these limitations, the question arises: do the limitations extend to what humans know? According to a leading theory of knowledge, knowledge is fact, meaning that only truths can be known. And lots of people, I guess, said that. However, if knowledge requires strict truth, and approximations are not strictly true, it is not possible to know approximations. Could we approximately know approximately? But then we'd have to perfectly approximate, I guess, and that might also be a problem. Okay, let this be the skeptical challenge for factive knowledge. A representation is known only if it is strictly true. Approximations are not strictly true. Therefore, approximations are not known. Many of our representations are mere approximations. Therefore, many of our representations are not known. Epistemologists may be willing to grant that some, perhaps even many, of our representations are ordinarily not known. Excuse me. But given the ubiquity of approximations in personal, professional, and public life, the extent of ignorance implied by this argument is noteworthy. To begin appreciating the skeptical challenge it poses, consider the sheer number of things we represent approximately, and thus, according to this argument, we no longer know. For instance, I do not know that my mailbox is the distance from the street I thought it was, and I added the amount of water to the recipe I thought it did, or that the current temperature or the current time is what I thought it was. In light of the fact that usually the best we do is merely approximate truth, the requirement of strict truth could undermine much of what we ordinarily take ourselves to know. You see, this is why I would modus ponens this. I would say, look, the approximation is what it is to do stuff, and we have to understand these first two premises here. Like, I wouldn't buy the naive interpretation of these premises, because I'd say most of our representations are, well, I guess what you call approximations, but I don't even know if I want to agree to this understanding of what our representations are at this point. So I'm going to most Toland's whole argument. That's where I'd go for it. So excuse me on the Toland's ponens mistake. Okay, so let's see if author covers my strategy. There are several potential responses to the skeptical argument. A first response rejects the premise that many of our representations about the world are mere approximation of what the world is like. This response appears to be a non-starter for several reasons. First, limitations of measurements are well known. Even the most astute or careful measurements are bound to merely approximate values that a more discerning instrument might later detect. Second, ordinary discourse and measurement are far less discerning than professional scientific measurement. We frequently round off such details in the course of daily life. Yeah, that's fine. A second line of response denies the premise that approximations are not strictly true. One way to deny this is to adopt relativism about truth. For example, pi equals 3.14 could be strictly true in the grade school classroom but false in the laboratory. This view can seem versatile and appealing. Moreover, relativism could be on strong footing in some domains such as morality or justification. But the relativist response to skepticism must go beyond those domains to encompass all of the domains where we ordinarily take ourselves to know many things, such as arithmetical calculations of the size of household objects, as well as the domains of scientific inquiry. This option is unavailable to philosophers who, like us, reject truth relativism. It could be a failing of ours, but no matter how hard we try, we simply cannot bring ourselves to believe that even if we find it plausible that in some contexts it is strictly true that pi is 3.14, or that it could be strictly true that we added 16 ounces to the mix, when in fact we only 15.90 ounces was added. Later, we will propose an alternative that avoids these consequences while matching truth relativism's appealing versatility. Another way to deny that approximations are not strictly true is to deny that representations in question are ever precise enough to count as false. So this is like what the other side of this, what they just said. So as opposed to like, instead of allowing not so clear things to be true, they're just going to deny that it's false. Okay, whatever. Let's see. When it comes to historical dates, for example, it's strictly true that the American Civil War ended in 1865. So long as the content is imprecise enough to encompass the margin of error, strict truth can be preserved. Thus, there is nothing in the fact of account that rules out the possibility of knowing the Civil War ended in 1865 or even in April of 1865, even if I do not know that it ended April 9th, 1865. Similarly, our visual representations of where the mailbox is located might not be 2 feet, but rather the distance between my two outstretched hands, wiggling them a bit, which is about 2 feet from the street. If representations are coarse-grained enough in these or other ways, the response goes, then they are coarse enough to account as strictly true. Okay, that's fair, I guess. I don't know if you'd want to do that all the places, but you're saying, look, you've got a range, and it's strictly within the range. This strategy is promising, but also can be questioned. It is an empirical question what the precise granularity of our representations is. As far as we are aware, this has not been established even approximately by research in the cognitive sciences. Thus, a coarse-grained account of representation is no better empirically supported than a fine-grained account, and it is an open question whether the present strategy succeeds. It is hostage to how the science turns out. In principle, there is nothing wrong with the issue ultimately hinging on how the science turns out, but as discussed below, we think that progress can be made independently of that. Yeah, I think this, like the example of pi in the elementary school classroom above, like in that classroom there's a range of like the amount of error is allowed there, and then in this is the flip side of that you're allowed to say, well, okay, it's between these two bounds, and we know it's between those two bounds, but then it's like, well, in the context of the elementary school classroom, then you also get that amount of range and just being like sort of wrong. So this is sort of the inverse story, and both of those, I guess they're both workable in different ways. So I'm agreeing with the authors on these sorts of things. Alright, a third response to the skeptical challenge accepts the conclusion but denies its force. Ordinary claims about everyday knowledge are false, but versions of them could be constructed that are true by including hedges and elliptical approximation clauses. So you can just complexify the whole thing. Alright. For example, when it comes to knowledge of distance or time, we know only the approximate distance or the approximate time, such as the age of the universe, give or take millions of years. Similarly, when we say false things like Smith knows that his mailbox is 2 feet from the street, perhaps we really mean to say that Smith knows the approximate position that his mailbox is 2 feet from the street. Restructuring our speech in these ways might even make knowing how old the universe is or where the mailbox is possible in virtue of knowing only the approximate proposition. So this is just factoring in our uncertainty. Alright. Such qualifications might also explain epistemic practices in some special domains, such as scientific inquiry. Scientific inquiry might aim to uncover truth, but it typically does no better than uncover approximate rather than exact truths. When speaking about what scientists believe, Alvin Goldman, for instance, writes that the sort of proposition they typically believe is not one expressed by a formula F, but one with the content F to some approximation. If this is true, then knowledge of specific unqualified truths about the world is ruled out, while approximate positions remain candidates for scientific knowledge. A related but distinct research program in philosophy of science emphasizes the use of laws, idealized models, felicitous falsehoods, and cognitively useful fictions in scientific inquiry. Catherine Elgin, for instance, argues that strictly false propositions can often increase our scientific understanding of natural phenomena and thus explain the epistemic legitimacy of science in the face of the kind of skepticism implied by the argument above. I mean, this is kind of along the lines of what I was saying. I say, well, I don't know what they mean by approximation is what I mean by it, because in some sense, what the scientists mean when they say stuff is that there's always the error, sort of the approximate built in. And so when you say strict truth, what you mean is strictly truth to some approximation. So, okay. While perhaps allowing us to retain some of everyday knowledge or scientific knowledge and offering a path to recover some ersatz knowledge, this response still comes with a cost. While most everyday knowledge claims could be made true, they are still false. Yeah, see, this is the other part of what I was saying. I would deny that the understanding of strict truth up there, so they're still false. This is the more semantic part of my argument above, where I'm just straight up modus tollens the understanding of truth up top. Okay, but yeah. Even scientific inquiry, arguably one of the best ways to acquire knowledge of the physical world, is necessarily limited to knowledge of qualified approximate truths. In fairness, this is exactly how the proposal was built. The skeptic is right, but it need not matter. Perhaps this is ultimately the best that can be done. However, we think that it is premature to settle for this without first considering at least one other strategy. We propose a fourth response. Knowledge does not require truth. That is, reject line 1. Oh, okay, let's see how they do that. This is closer to what I wanted to say, too. Instead, false but approximate true propositions can be known. Okay, so the strict truth people who only said you're allowed to know true stuff, so you can know false stuff. Alright, so we can have knowledge of false things. Okay. Instead, false but approximately true propositions can be known. Call this the approximation account of knowledge. On this view, they only need to adequately represent the truth. Although there are potentially many ways that approximations could be adequate, one way is for them to serve our purposes well enough to facilitate action and help us achieve our goals in a particular circumstance. For example, 3.14 might be adequate and hence known as the value of pi in the grade school classroom, but inadequate and hence not known as the value of pi in the lab engineering a global positioning system. The approximation account avoids questions associated with the other responses considered above. Unlike the first response, the approximation account does not rely on unrealistic assumptions about measuring devices or human cognition. Unlike the second response, the approximation account preserves the link between knowing, on the one hand, and common sense norms and standards of communication and inquiry on the other. Relatedly, the approximation account does not simply imply that most of our ordinary knowledge claims are false, nor that speaking truthfully about these matters requires ubiquitous hedging. Unlike the second response considered above, the approximation account does not endorse relativism about truth. On our proposal, truth is perfectly objective. Surely something has to give in response to the skeptical challenge, but instead of giving up on objective truth, we give up on the truth as a requirement of knowledge. Well, I think what they really want to say here is the overly strict truth as a requirement of give up on truth, because that strict truth was what they were saying at the beginning, and it's like you can only have like the absolute truth, and I don't know if anyone actually knows what the absolute truth about anything is, and so it seems that may have been a bit of a could be a little bit of a straw man first of all, but it seems like I might just disagree with those other folks who were arguing for strict truth at the beginning. I mean, the authors quoted a bunch of them, so there must be a well-liked theory, but that might be too high a bar for anything we actually might want to consider truth. Okay, we propose in its place a standard for judging approximations that relativizes to practical purposes. This entails that a representation might be adequate relative to one practical context, but inadequate relative to another. It is important to emphasize that on our proposal, it is not because it is true in one context but false in another. Instead, it is because It is because, trivially, the demands of success action depend on features of the practical context, which are not always the same. We submit that exploiting the unobjectionable relativity of practical adequacy is theoretically preferable to resorting to relativism about truth. Okay, so they're just denying the truth as a requirement and saying practical adequacy. So they're not denying truth, they're swapping it out for some other thing. I mean, I guess someone could complain that maybe this is just sort of sleight of hand here, that they're slipping back into relativism and truth, they're just calling it something different. I don't know. It is also important to emphasize that our proposal does not sever the conceptual connection between knowledge and truth. Yeah, see, this is the sleight of hand. It's like, you're trying to keep, you want your cake and eat it too. You want to keep knowledge and truth, but then you want to say, but all the other times we're gonna use this practical adequacy thing over here. Don't worry about truth so much. We still keep the good truth, but all right. Let's see what the authors have to say. One virtue of all three proposals considered earlier is that they preserve an intuitive link between knowledge and truth. The approximation account has this virtue too, in at least two ways. On the one hand, conceptually, truth sets the standard by which approximations are judged worthy or not. Truth anchors a tolerable margin for error. On the other hand, whoa. The tolerable margin for error. So, truth defines the error bars, but then if it defined the error bars, what's the point of the other stuff? I don't. On the other hand, truth sets the standard. How does it set the standard? I mean, the whole point of the truth was that it isn't. It doesn't permit these sort of like fuzzy relations. All right, let me continue. On the other hand, an ideal instance of knowledge will be strictly true. Yes, strictly. We can allow as the constituent representation more closely approximate the strict truth, the better the knowledge becomes. Other things being equal, yeah, well, this right here, we can, this doesn't follow from this. Like, we can already have this, that as you get closer to the truth, that's okay. But what would a tolerable margin for error be? That doesn't, like, the margin of error doesn't mean anything as long as you're getting closer. I mean, they're two separate concepts. Okay. Other things being equal, improving a representation's accuracy means that you know better. In the limit, as a representation's precision increases indefinitely while still remaining strictly true, it would be adequate for any practical purposes. Sure. In the limit, yeah. Okay. Aside from providing a direct response to the skeptical argument, another strength of our proposal is that it coheres well with prior theoretical developments in epistemology. For instance, the approximation account naturally coheres with the theory that knowledge is importantly connected to action and practical interests. According to such a view, whether a proposition is known depends partially on whether it is appropriate to treat that proposition as a reason for action in a particular situation. If actionability is a component of knowledge and reliance on approximate truth can often be appropriate or even practically necessary to facilitate action, then it is reasonable to integrate approximate truth into pragmatic accounts of knowledge. Sorry, I got distracted. I'm just reading without thinking correctly. This is some sort of pragmatist position, and I'm okay with that. It's like you're saying, look, if it's actionable, if it's pragmatic, then it might be reasonable to integrate it, and that's fine. But again, this is a separate thing from this how you understand truth up here. So I mean that's fair. That's what they did say. Okay. Pursuant to all of that, in certain respects, the approximation account is the antithesis of the Cartesian view. At the end of Meditation 1, in the context of justifying his method of hyperbolic doubt, Descartes considers an objection. Even if our senses are in some respects doubtful, is it not nevertheless more reasonable to trust rather than to distrust them? Descartes responds, "It is impossible for me to indulge in too much distrust since I am now concentrating only on knowledge, not on action." On Descartes' approach, one can set action aside when theorizing about knowledge, at least in its ideal form. On our approach, far from being able to set action aside, one achieves ideal knowledge only when the constituent representation is precise and accurate enough to inform action in any practical context. See, it is a pragmatic thing here. They're pragmatists. Rather than being separate from action, ideal knowledge is partly defined by its connection to action across indefinite range of situations. Okay, that's fine, but yeah, again, then you're not keeping strict truth again. I feel like there's a disconnect here. This definition also coheres with recent work on epistemic normativity and epistemic conditions on practical reasoning. Michael Schaffer, for example, argues that it is epistemically rational to employ certain kinds of false propositions in practical reasoning so long as they approximate true, and that we can be efficient problem solvers and deliberators even though we do not reason in maximally accurate ways on the basis of exact truths. We agree with this basic observation, but in contrast we suggest that one straightforward explanation for why this behavior can be rational is because some approximate truths can be known. The approximation account could also cohere with some versions of contextualism. According to David Lewis, S knows that P if and only if S is evidence and limits every possibility in which P, not P, except for those possibilities we are properly ignoring. Okay. The context of the attribution distinguishes epistemically relevant from irrelevant possibilities of error. Yeah, I mean, this is always the case. There's always certain things you have to rule out. So, how you do that is interesting. When deciding what a subject knows, only the relevant possibilities need to be ruled out by a subject's evidence in order for an attributor to ascribe knowledge. For Lewis, the factivity of knowledge is guaranteed by the further rule of actuality, according to which the actual world is never properly ignored. Properly. What does that mean? One way to unpack this, we submit, is that things actually are the way things actually are is a fixed point from which a practically acceptable margin of error is established. We can properly ignore error possibilities that fall in the gap between strict truth and the outer limits of practically adequate approximation. Further research is necessary to explore whether the approximation account is best executed with mechanisms developed by contextualists, interest-relative invariantists, or others. For present purposes, however, we think the prospect that it could be readily accommodated by several leading accounts of knowledge adds to its plausibility and further motivates the proposal. Finally, we would be remiss if we failed to remark upon a curious and ironically useful consequence of our proposal. We propose abandoning the mainstream view that knowledge requires truth and replacing it with the view that knowledge requires merely an adequate approximation of truth. Moreover, we argued for this in the context of a skeptical challenge that, as far as we are aware, has received little if any attention in contemporary epistemology. Thus, it could turn out that, with respect to the context in which the theory of knowledge is typically pursued, the view that knowledge requires truth is an adequate approximation of the view that knowledge requires not truth but mere adequate approximation. In other words, by our own lights, it is possible that proponents of the false mainstream view know that it is true. We submit that this is an excellent explanation of the mainstream view's appeal. Very cute. Some people might take that to be a absurd case, that you would have to agree that different theories of truth are also true even though they don't agree with your theory of truth. You'd say, well, that's an approximation, that's okay, but even so, then it's like you have to say that two different theories of two different epistemologies are correct when pushing your epistemology. Now, that's fine, but in certain contexts, but I don't think most people are going to swallow that metaphysically. In summary, we consider it a skeptical challenge that arises in light of condition that is widely accepted as a necessary condition of knowledge, truth. If knowledge requires truth, then the fact that many of our beliefs are false threatens skepticism. We view the main contribution of this paper to be isolating the skeptical challenge for factive knowledge, reviewing several responses to this challenge, and hopefully inspiring more nuanced future theorizing on factive constraints on knowledge in light of it. To that end, we also proposed a response to the skeptical challenge and theory of our own, relinquishing the truth requirement on knowledge and allowing adequate approximations to be known. This response addresses the skeptical challenge, avoids questions facing other responses, retains a conceptual connection between knowledge and truth, coheres with several other developments in theoretical epistemology, and can explain the widespread appeal of the view that knowledge requires truth. This was a fun paper. I mean, I got some, you heard me complaining about some things, but they're really not that bad. So my complaints are, in some sense, no one's gonna get a theory of truth just perfectly done. They're saying, you know what, that's exactly how things are. So it's like, how do you actually approximate truth and then without biting the bullet and saying there is no truth? Well, they say, look, if truth is an approximation to begin with, and then how do you work from that position. So this is a nice essay. I think it's, I mean, as I said, I've got some problems, but that doesn't really, they're not, that doesn't make it a bad paper. It's a good paper, and they did a good job with how they argued for it too, because you're arguing against truth, which most people freak out about. What was I saying down here? Yeah. What was it? Where was it? Okay, it doesn't matter. Yeah, I think this just presents a pragmatic sort of approximation theory, which is fine. And perhaps that's the way to go. I'm a little bit pragmatic myself, so I'm cool with mostly, like, even though I sort of disagree with this paper, I'm with them in spirit. So, so that's good. I like that. You don't have to agree with everything to think it's a good paper or agree with what their end, sort of the end result is. So if anyone has any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, I'll be back later today. I'm sorry I didn't get the last paper up on the YouTubes. Looks like there's some technical problems and I forgot about it. I have to go investigate what happened. Hopefully it isn't lost. Otherwise, have a great day and stay safe out there. Bye-bye.